I realize that I've spent a lot of time as a Christian, as a pastor, trying to de-weird Christianity. I just made up that word. I don't think that's a word, but I don't know if you've experienced this, but like when I went to, when I would go to churches, church camps, when I'd be around other Christians, like honestly, I had this impulse where I like kind of wanted to knock and be like, hey, is there a real person in there somewhere? Ever had that experience where you felt like people were trying to live up to these standards that in their mind were Christian, but there wasn't a real person to go with it. And then sometimes they force those standards onto other people that maybe were somewhat authentic to them, somewhat not. And I've just had this experience sometimes, and other people describe it like Christians just being weird, fake, not authentic people, which I think is a little harsh. But I sometimes I feel myself wanting to show people like, hey, I'm just a normal dude. I like to do a lot of things that people who don't go to church like to do. There's stuff that I've got my rough edges, and in fact, part of what transformed me or really impacted me was when I met some people along the way who were real. Like they had rough edges. They seemed just like normal people to me, but they were really going after Jesus. And in fact, one of those people, his name's Nathan Couch, was a guy who told me when I was 22, like, I think you're going to be a pastor. I think you're going to plant a church, plant churches. And that rough hillbilly Christian changed my life, you know? I wonder if you've had that experience too, where somebody was just authentic being who they were, but their relationship with Jesus authentically impacted you. So sometimes I feel myself wanting to show people that I'm just a normal guy who's going after Jesus. My whole life is dedicated to it. And I hope that rubs off on people in whatever way it will. So like I said, I've spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take the weirdness out of being Christian. But I thought about something this week. When I was in my time away, spending some time in silence and solitude, on the beach, which I realize is a privilege. My brother's 29 years old and he's never seen the ocean. I know going on vacation is a privilege, so it was. But in my time away, what occurred to me, I wondered if God looks upon our rhythms, not just Christian people, but humans, especially in our neck of the woods, looks upon our pace, our rhythms, our way of life, and goes, you all are weird. What we experience as normal, the amount of time we work, the energy and focus we put into career, our pursuit of making money, our ambitions, our motives, desires. I wonder if sometimes the God who loves us unconditionally looks upon us and goes, man, what you think is really normal is the opposite of normal. It's weird to me. It's not how I've made you to be. It reminds me of when I was in Greece in 2011 for a few weeks, and I still owe her for this. I was gone for my first wedding anniversary. And I was trying to mail my wife something. I was really trying to make up, I was try to pick these flowers and send them whatever. And I couldn't the post office was never open. I'd walk into the village and it'd be like normal business hours in America. Nobody would be there. I'd be coming back from dinner at 9:00 at night. There they would be working in the post office. It'd be 10:00 in the morning. People would be chilling out on their patios, smoking cigarettes and just easing into the day, as Angela's grandpa would say. I was like, man, And I'm not saying that's a good way to be because their economy was a disaster, but it did make me wonder, and I wonder again, maybe the things that are great for the economy are bad for the soul. Maybe some of the things, not all of them, but maybe some of the things that make an economy go boom, maybe some of them, not all of them, are not normal and good for the soul. Why am I saying all this? I sense that a lot of people, especially in these times, are experiencing this disorder deep within. Like the psalmist asked, why is my soul so disquieted within? Why am I so upset inside? Well, I was reminded again when I was gone this week that I had given myself all over again to a pace, to rhythms and habits and motives that were slowly and consistently disordering my soul. And the thing that began to restore me was prayer. Daily prayer. Transformational prayer. Not prayer that's like asking something of God to get something in return, but just prayer in terms of just being with God. And it makes me think about this first part. We're going to have 5 weeks where we're going to talk about prayer that changes you, me, and everything. And I want to share with you 5 prayer practices, not like a to-do list, but 5 prayer rhythms that are shaped after the Lord's Prayer, and also 5 practices that in the last 5 to 10 years have dramatically changed my life. I feel like I've grown a lot as a prayer in the last 5 to 10 years. But before I share that first practice that we're going to go with today, I would love to hear from you and folks online. If Maureen, you can relay those things. What is your struggle with prayer? And I'll get a drink of coffee while you're thinking. Hannah says she gets distracted. Her brain wanders. Sue nods to that. Me too. Selfish prayer. Can you say more about that? Joanna says that she's always going to God with... Yeah, going to God with your laundry list instead of kind of practicing some gratitude or being present. What else? Maureen shares, for those of you online, and maybe you couldn't hear it in here, like setting aside time. She'll see somebody ask for a prayer on Facebook and stop and pray for it, but in terms of setting aside devoted time to be meditative, present in prayer, that's the challenge. Yeah. Staying focused, someone feeling like God isn't listening. Is God hearing this? Laziness. I'd rather do something else. That's honest. I appreciate that. Talk about being real. Repeating the same prayers each time. Ooh, yeah, we'll talk about that one. Mm-hmm. Dave shares, and I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Dave. That's a gift to us. Dave is like, I don't know how to pray. Is there a right way to pray? So this series is, it's going to address how to pray, but it's not feeling genuine, feeling like it's rehearsed. Yeah. You as you're praying, while you're midstream in praying, you have like another stream of thought that's going, what am I doing actually? Is God even real? Am I just talking to myself? Only praying when you feel like you need something. All right, I'm going to go about my day. Ooh, this isn't going well. Okay, God, can we talk? Because I need something here. Help me out. Are you listening? Yeah, I know. I feel that too. This series, it really is, like I said, it's shaped after the Lord's Prayer. So, Dave, it's going to address how to pray, because I hear that from a lot of people. It's their prayer life isn't suffering for lack of desire or curiosity. It's just like, I think about it sometimes when my son is trying a sport for the first time, and like fundamentals that I've practiced for years that I take for granted. He's like learning for the first time. And I'm not saying you're like my son riding a bike, Dave, but I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way in praying. Like, what do I do? What do I say? Do I say something? Does God speak back? I'm not hearing anything. This series is going to address all that stuff. Like I said, it's shaped after the Lord's Prayer. I'm not going to teach you the Lord's Prayer, but just to let you behind the curtain, the 5 practices we're going to talk about are patterned right after the Lord's Prayer. So let's dive into them. I'll tell you what they are, and I'll keep repeating them every week. 1 word per practice. Hear, like, when the teacher's like calling out attendance, like, Jason Baker, and Jason goes, here. That's week 1. Hear, thanks, forgive, help, and protect. Hear, thanks, forgive, help, protect. That's shaped right after the Lord's Prayer. Those 5 practices, and they're shaped after the tradition of the entire Scriptures. And they are the practices that in the last 5 to 10 years have dramatically changed my life. I feel like I'm just learning how to pray, even though I've been doing it for a long time. And it reminds me of what Eugene Peterson, the author of The Message, says. He says we're all beginners. If you think that you've got it figured out, you need to go back to square one. So, part of what this is going to address today, to go back to Dave's point, is that you learn how to pray by praying, which I know is like other things. Can't you just reinforce some bad habits? Of course you can. But what I hope to teach you today is, looks like we've had a disconnection with the camera. Hopefully it comes back. Okay. Yeah, she has too. What this first practice is about, this practice is the most important one, this first one, because it is the one that helps to prune off all of the unhelpful prayer practices that we've learned, that we try out. This is the one, this prayer practice, this first week, that I keep learning how critical it is. here. Again, I mean like this. When the teacher says like, Hannah Fogo, and Hannah's like, here. But here's the difference, what I'm talking about today. Sometimes you can say here, and you're in attendance, but you're not present. And you realize that when in 3 weeks you take a test on the material of the day when you said here, and you take the test and you get like a D-, and you're like, I was there, but I clearly wasn't present. I realize right now that's a bad analogy because prayer is not a test. But practice 1 is about being present. And that is the hardest thing, the hardest obstacle that people face in praying. When I hear input about what people struggle with, when I look at my own struggles, that's the one. The struggle to be fully present with all of yourself in a prayerful moment. The good news is this: the more we practice wholehearted present-mindedness with God in prayer, the more we will wake up to how much God is with us. The more we will be shaped by God's character in that moment and in all moments throughout the day. If you have a good or a quality like present-minded prayer moment to begin your day, you will see God in all of your day. It's the prayer practice that shaped my life over the last 5 to 10 years. We'll talk more about the how of it and the why and the what of it in a minute, but I want to share like a piece of scripture that I think speaks to this practice, and we'll dig into more. What do I mean by like here and really meaning it? That's the practice, is saying here and really meaning it in prayer. So we're in 1 Kings 19. We're doing Old Testament today. Are you excited? All right. Next, we're going to do a series on Chronicles. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. Who knows? We might someday. This is called 1 Kings 19. It's a book in the Bible in the Old Testament that deals with just that. Like it's a history book in a way, but it's more of a narrative history about the time of God's people, the kings that reigned in their time, and also other religious prominent figures who guided God's people through some really, really hard times. This is a story about evil. This is an account about things that went really wrong in the world and what some prominent people did in the midst of it. This is the story of a guy by the name of Elijah. So I'm in 1 Kings chapter 19. Here's the backstory. Elijah went on a bit of a crusade because of evil he was seeing in his time. He was seeing a bunch of false prophets, and he went on a crusade. In my book, some of it was borderline. I'm not sure if some of his crusading actions were good ones. We're not going to talk about that today, though. His heart was for God. And it reminds me of us in prayer. What I hear about a lot of people in prayer, like people have a desire for God. People pray who aren't even religious. I put it up on our social media. Pew Research says that people who consider themselves not religious, of that group, 20% say they pray daily. Not religious folks, 20% say they pray daily. Elijah's heart was for God. He had a passion, a zeal for God and for bringing God's way to earth. And so he goes on this crusade, and it gets him in deep trouble. Such there's this person, Jezebel, who's chasing him down to kill him. He's running for his life. Jezebel sends a message to Elijah. This is chapter 19, verse 2. She says, "May the gods do whatever they want to me if by this time tomorrow I haven't made your life like one of them. What does she mean, one of them? One of the prophets, false prophets, evil prophets that Elijah killed. I told you, he went on a crusade. I think some of his actions were borderline. Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you. She's chasing him down. And he is, when we pick up this verse in a minute, he is running, Elijah is, frantically and furiously for his life. Anybody in here feel like because of your pace and way of life, you're running for your life sometimes? Like, I might be wrong. I don't think anybody in this room has someone chasing them down trying to kill them. If that's not true, let me know. Let's talk. You need some help. Let's get it. But your way of life may feel like threat. Your pace, your commitments, your motives may feel like you're running for your life. And in the midst of this, it says Elijah was terrified. He got up and ran for his life. Verse 3. He arrives at Beersheba in Judah, in the southern part of Israel, and left his assistants there. Verse 4, he himself went further on the desert, into the desert a day's journey. He finally sat down under a solitary broom bush. He longed for his own death. He was not in a good place. It's more than enough, Lord. Take my life because I'm no better than my ancestors. His ancestors who were maybe zealous but did all kinds of terrible things, thought about God one minute, didn't think about God the next, were selfish, self-centered. I'm no better, he says. He lay down and slept under the solitary broom bush. Then suddenly a messenger tapped him and said to him, "Get up and eat something." Elijah opened his eyes and saw a flatbread baked on glowing coals and a jar of water right by his head. He ate and drank and then went back to sleep. Then the Lord's messenger returned a second time and tapped him. "Get up," the messenger said. "Eat something because you have a difficult road ahead of you." Elijah got up, ate and drank, and went refreshed by that food for 40 days and 40 nights until he arrived at Horeb, God's mountain. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Here's what I want you to hear today. The Lord's word came to him and said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" Elijah replied, "I have been very passionate for the Lord God of heavenly forces because the Israelites have abandoned your covenant. They have torn down your altars. They have murdered your prophets with the sword. I'm the only one now left, and now they want to take my life too." Did I say he's running for his life? The Lord said, "Go out and stand at the mountain before the Lord." I want to pause here. The Lord is saying to Elijah, as he's running for his life, running frantically, furiously for his life, God is basically saying, "Hey, can you go to that space right there because we're going to have a prayerful moment together." Do you see that tension? Fury, frantic pace, running from the threats that are trying to take your life, and God's like, "Hey, can you sit down and be quiet for a minute?" Do you get what I'm saying? I realized when I was on vacation this week, like how hard it was for me to sit still as I have the ocean in front of me. I got the most beautiful work of God sitting in front of me. God's artistry sitting there, the greatest majesty that you can behold as a human being in many ways, in my opinion. And I can't sit still and be present with God for a minute. I kept struggling with saying, "Here," and not really meaning it. Because I came to that moment with this fury, this pace, these habits that felt so normal to me in the weeks preceding, a normal way of life that made it darn near impossible for me to sit still and be quiet. in God's presence for a minute? Any of you feel like that? I hear it all the time. Yeah, Ross, I just can't do that. That's not me. I know you're talking about like sitting still and being quiet, and for how many of you, I'd just be interested, for how many of you is that just darn near impossible to do? Sit still and be quiet for like 15 minutes. Thanks, Kara, for sharing. Anybody else? Hard, Sue, Josh? I am too. We have a pace about our lives that's very normal in our neck of the woods that makes it darn near impossible to sit still, empty out your thoughts, and be present with God. Elijah's being asked by God. He's running for his life, and God's like, hey, can you stop for a minute and just be quiet? God, do you not know what's going on in my life? I can't do that. They're chasing after me. I'm on the run, man. I can't sit still. And yet I'm telling you, it is the most important prayer practice that there is, and it's not close. Psalm 46:10 is a verse that has haunted religious people for ages. Be still and know that I am God. Haunted religious people for ages because we read it and go, how do you do that? What does that mean? So we're going to stop and practice it for just 1 minute. It's going to feel, Kara's face just revealed, it's so scary. We're going to practice praying in church? For the love of God, what are we doing here? If we're not practicing, we're not here to just hear a talk and go home and go to lunch, I hope. I mean, if you are, it's okay. But hopefully we grow into something deeper. Online, it might be tough for you. You might have kids running around, a lot of noise, but I'm asking you as well. For 60 seconds, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, empty out your thoughts. Hannah talked about her struggle of distraction. It's so hard. Your to-do list is going to pop into your head. The bad work day you had this week is going to come to your head. The bill that you have due, it's all going to come right now. Breathe deeply. Be silent for 60 seconds. Now. That right there is the beginning of prayer. That was 60 seconds. How did it feel? Kara says long. You had to say the Lord's Prayer, Sue, to keep you focused. Yeah. Who else? Online, anybody? How was that? How was just being still and silent for 60 seconds? John was tapping his fingers. Yeah. wait for somebody online. Anybody else in the room? The longest minute ever. Who said that? Steve. The longest minute ever. And I appreciate Steve sharing that, you know. That exercise right there in itself can prune away some of the unhelpful practices we have with prayer. It can reshape your entire life. To Dave's question, that is the beginning of how to pray. I didn't learn this practice until the last 5 to 10 years. When I start most of my days, I try to have a good 5 minutes before I read any scripture, before I say anything, where I'm silent, trying to clear out my head, and I might say something this simple: God, I hope to be here with you today. That's it. If I hear a thought coming in, I try to clear it out. No, it's not allowed here. I am present with God right now. That practice over the last 5 to 10 years has shaped me to the core, and it's made me in my days out there way more aware of what's going on in other people, in me, and God at work in all of it. Prayer does not start with talking. It starts with present-mindedness and deep listening. Warning: you are going to experience an endless amount of doubt about not hearing anything. Ross, I did the silence thing. First of all, it was really hard, it wasn't helpful, and I didn't hear anything from God. If I heard anything, I think it was my own thoughts. Ross, how do I know whether it's my thought or it's God's voice? Yes. Does God not speak through your thoughts? I've had maybe a handful of times in my life where I felt like I was audibly hearing the voice of God, and I was darn sure it was God's voice. A lot of the other times, I'm not so sure, but I act on it anyhow. That too is teaching me how to pray, teaching you how to pray. If this week, here's my challenge to you, and then we'll finish this out. My challenge to you is this: start every day, as early as you can in that day, by going to a space that is secluded or private. I don't care if it's your closet. Maybe you're like, Ross, it's the worst place because it's the messiest place. Find a place. If it's somewhere in the barn, Angie's got a barn. Maybe she'll let you use it, you know. Go somewhere where you can be secluded and quiet and still, and start with 60 seconds. Maybe be incredibly bold and do 2 minutes. Where no thoughts are allowed in, no to-do list building, nothing, except something like, God, I don't know what I'm doing here. I feel weak as a prayer, but I hope to hear your voice in this time. And just breathe. Jesus did it all the time. I shared it last week or 2 weeks ago. Matthew 14. He gets in a boat to go alone to pray. Ross, I can't find a secluded place. Jesus had to get in a boat to go be by himself. And even then, he saw a crowd of people. Did you know that Jesus got distracted in praying? Bob, did you know that? I mean, so if you do, it's all right. He sees a crowd of people, decides to feed their bellies and their souls. It interrupts his praying, but guess what? When he's done feeding them, he says, hey, you disciples, go on ahead in that boat. And he goes up to a mountain to be still and remember who God is and who He is in God. That is the beginning and end of praying. Learning how to be fully present in God. If you do that, you will begin to discover God's character in fuller ways. You will see how God is really with us. Jesus says, "Behold, I will be with you until the end of the age." His nickname is Emmanuel, God with us. Psalm 23 says, "Though I'm in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for God is with me." When you practice this stillness and silence, you will begin to experience, it may take weeks, months to practice it, you will start to experience the fullness of God's with us. God's being with us. Listen to what happens to Elijah. The Lord said, "Go out and stand at the mountain before the Lord. The Lord is passing by." A very strong wind tore through the mountains and broke apart the stones before the Lord, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. After the fire, there was a sound, thin, quiet. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his coat. He went out and stood at the cave's entrance. A voice came to him and said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" If you practice stillness and silence, we think sometimes of praying as hearing like God's booming voice. "Here's my list, God. Can you take care of business for me?" That is a part of praying. We're going to talk about it in a few weeks. The beginning of prayer is seeking God in silence. Start with 2 minutes this week, 1 minute if you have to. Build it up to 2. If you can get up to 5 to 10 minutes to start your day of emptying out your brain, quieting your heart and soul and saying, "God, I'm here and I really want to be here. Help me to hear your voice." Sometimes for me, it's, "God, I hope to abide in your vine." It's me announcing that I'm present and I hope to be as present with God as possible. If you do that this week and you keep growing in that practice, it's going to change your life. The Lord says, "Be still and know that I am God." All right, 1 more minute. Let's do it again. You ready? This time, I want you to practice saying one sentence to God, like, "God, I want to be present with you." Or, "God, I hope to hear your voice." Whatever it is for you, let it be, starting now.